Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Psychology and Spirituality, a bridge to a better life discussion. I'm your host, Marcia Trajano, and with me is Yuri Castro, who is a clinical psychologist and he's also a spiritist like me. He's a member of the Conscious Living Spiritist group in North Miami in Florida. Thank you for being here with us. But Yuri, if this is the first time for you, anyone else in the audience watching this program, please note that our weekly talks are based on the works by Joanna de Angelis, and they're here to offer you and me a safe space to confront, compare, correlate, and expand spirituality concepts from a psychological lens. We'd love to use this as a conduit to bring insights, actionable tips, and any advice to help you and I lead a better life. Today's program, sponsored by Mansão do Caminho, the United States Spirits Federation, the International Spiritist Council, and AMI Brazil. Yuri, I was thinking before we started this conversation today about two very different figures. In the Christian faith, the apostle St. Paul, right? The apostle Paul to us, St. Paul, famously said that suffering produces resistance, resistance produces character, and character produces faith. A very interesting thought that he brings to us, which links suffering and faith. Well, let's bring something closer to our day to day life for anyone else out there. Because I was also thinking, and this is very interesting, but I had incredible opportunity several years ago to meet Billie Jean King, BJK, right? Several years ago. And for those of you who do not know her, she is the very famous American tennis player. She won 39 Grand Slam titles. She is an advocate for gender equality and has been a real pioneer in that social justice arena. She is mostly famous. There's a movie actually not so long ago that was aired about the 1973, when she was only 29, that she won the quote unquote battle of the sexes, which was a match between her, a woman, and Bobby Riggs. But she wrote a book, right? And the title is Pressure is a Privilege. And this book came about the fact that she often said that to herself, right? And there is a lot of wisdom in this, this four words. Pressure is a privilege. Can you imagine, Yuri, the weight of expectations that perhaps could crush anyone, but it didn't crush her, right? And so she kept saying, if you have a lot of pressure, it's because there's an opportunity that comes along. In her book of the same title, it was published in 2008, and I'm going to read this so that we can all savor her words. She says in one of the chapters, the moments of great pressure in your life, speaking in public, interviewing for a big job, or even the school of your dreams, dealing with health issues, working through difficulties with someone you love, raising a child, they're all born out of the importance of the situation. So I pause here to say, right? Great pressure, opportunity, and it's all about the significance of that situation, right? So she continues, it is a privilege to have such opportunities, to be trusted to lead a meeting, to be a desired job candidate, to love someone or be loved, to be a parent. So the pressure that comes with them must be seen as a privilege also. And she finishes, Yuri, which is to me quite really words that help me dealing with something that I am going through at this very moment. If you can see it that way, you can handle almost anything with calm and grace. So, with St. Paul and Billie Jean King in mind, I was hoping, Yuri, we could perhaps talk about that internal turmoil that we go through, be it through external expectation, be it through all that emotional undercurrents that we're bringing. What can we say about the topic suffering?
Excellent. Thank you so much. First of all, it's a pleasure to be here to be able to talk about psychology and spiritism, two passions of mine. I really liked the introduction you gave there, especially talking about the Apostle Paul and also bringing it to more of something of more current with Billie Jean King. And they both went through suffering. They both had their own deals of pressure that they had to endure throughout their lives. If we think of the life of the Apostle Paul, for instance, it was a lot of suffering he had to go through, and there was the pressure as well that he had to overcome when he was he was just converted from Saul to Paul, and then he started his whole peregrination and just going through places and trying to spread the word of the gospel of Jesus and the teachings and everything. And he saw a lot of closed doors as he was going through that, first with his family, his own father, former friends, new friends of his new faith, and all of that. All of that created that pressure, and certainly he suffered so much, but he used all of that to build exactly what you said, that I didn't know about that, but it was great, about suffering bringing resistance, and then that creates character, and then creates faith. It's almost, if we think of from a more psychological standpoint, perhaps we can see it through the lens of like steps, one thing leading to the other. And Paul, his whole life was that, and it was incredible, some of the things that he's done, that he says, whenever he was in great suffering, or he was, even when he was being beat up, when he was in jail, when he was like in prison and everything, he would still say, wow, his view was incredible. He'd say, Jesus thought that I was worthy of this challenge. And that, I think, makes a great bridge to what BJK said about pressure is a privilege, and the suffering that comes with the pressure also a privilege, I think.
Yes, absolutely. I think we can start frame our mind perhaps in the question of what causes suffering. Is suffering, and some people would say that, right? Suffering is inevitable. Is it? Is it, because there's a difference between pain and suffering, right?
Yes.
What can we talk about the difference, and leading to the fact that what is the subject, for example, for you as a clinical psychologist?
Yeah.
What do you deal with on a day-to-day basis, perhaps, and that how can you enlighten us with the discussion about suffering?
Yes. Thank you. That's a very good point, because I also see it through the lens of, there's the difference between pain and suffering.
Mhm.
And I'll give you my view on both the psychology aspect and the psychological aspect, and also the spiritual aspect. So for the psychological aspect, yes, in my profession, it's basically dealing with suffering in different forms. Sometimes they come in the form of diagnosis, of symptoms from diagnosis, not necessarily meeting the criteria for the diagnosis and everything, but they all come with suffering and pain. And the pain that's attached to the suffering is incredible when we're able to utilize reframing techniques, perhaps. And there's so many different lines of psychology. This is something that I wanted to mention, that there isn't just one line of psychology that deals with suffering and deals with pain from all sorts. And what we do basically in some of these lines of therapy is reassign the meaning of the pain, because life is full of disappointments. Life here in the planet, and the way we are right now, we're gonna have suffering, and we're gonna have pain. But the thing is, what do we do with that suffering? What do we do with that pain? How do we see the pain, and what can be done with it? So there's also something that I usually bring to to the sessions that's interesting. It's a little image that there's a few different things that we can do with the pain. We can simply suffer from it, or like just, and there's like a picture of a person being crushed by the stone, a boulder. There we can drag the pain and not deal with that and then create even more suffering. We can analyze the pain. We can learn with the pain, from the pain perhaps. We can accept it, and in the end it's transform it. And it's such a beautiful picture, because in the end, the big boulder, there's a heart sculpted from that, from the transformation of that pain. And I think that's usually a very powerful metaphor, a very powerful visualization that we can help clients and patients in the field of psychology to go through the suffering, reassigning meaning to their pain.
Yeah, you remind me actually, Yuri, of someone that I just absolutely am a fan, Viktor Frankl, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if those of you who are here with us do not know what Viktor Frankl is, he is a Austrian, right, neurologist and psychologist, as well as a Holocaust survivor. So
Mm-hmm.
think about it. In the field of work that he founded, logotherapy, it's all about
Yes.
what he learned in extreme conditions of loss and suffering, and how he talks so much about giving or reassigning, as you mentioned, meaning. One of the things that he said that I thought was I really like to bring back to us, which is, and by the way, I started to study Viktor Frankl at work, right? So we brought this sentence that he quotes at work to an audience of, I don't know, almost 100 business colleagues to talk
Amazing.
about Viktor Frankl. So this is super cool. But he brought, and I can even see in my mind the graph that the facilitator of that session brought to us, which is almost like a seesaw, right? And in that, they talked about what he said between stimulus, one area of the seesaw, and response, there's a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom. And he really talked in his book, right, what happened in it's quite even difficult for some people to read his books, but in his book, one of his books, he talks about, for example, the seesaw, right? If the pivot is in the middle, anything goes. But if you're able to move, maybe one has more weight than the other, and hope and faith, like St. Paul brought to us, may be the more powerful, more there's more meaning, more weight than your response. But it's all about resignifying, giving a different meaning to what you're going
Yes.
through to be able to manage that.
Absolutely. Yes. That he's yeah, he's one of the people that I look up to as well. And it's, there's, like I said, there's different lines of psychology that treat, and they maybe see through those lens of reassigning things, reassigning meanings and everything. And even if we go further into the development of diagnosis and severe and persistent mental illness, for instance, schizophrenia, that's one that's like, there's a lot of study around that diagnosis, and they were trying to see the environmental factors and how much that impacts the the genesis, the onset of a diagnosis such as schizophrenia. So what they did, they usually do studies with twins, and which are, the twins that are genetically equal. So they go and they study those twins both when they live apart and also when they live together. And sometimes they see 48% correlation rate between if one twin has developed schizophrenia and the other doesn't in a traumatic environment, because it is a diathesis stress diagnosis, which means you need an environmental trigger to create the onset of the condition. But it's interesting to see how can two people be biologically 100% genetically the same, yet they develop, and they go through the same thing as well. So they're biologically the same. They go through the same environment, same traumatizing environment oftentimes. Why does one develop and the other doesn't? If we we don't even talk about spiritism yet, or the teachings from spiritism. But if we look at from the psychological standpoint, we can already see that there's something there, like you said, in between. There's something in between that must occur, that will somebody will develop that something as debilitating as schizophrenia is, and the other person does not. And it's not a high rate. 48% is not a high rate. If we think about 52%, meaning there's a filter through each the other person that didn't develop, then how are they internalizing the pain and the suffering? What sort of meaning are they assigning to it? And I think that speaks a lot, just from a psychological standpoint,
Yeah.
about the difference between what do we do with it. What do we do with the suffering and the pain once it comes?
Yeah. So, because we talked a lot about the pain and pain, suffer. Oh my goodness, pain stemming from suffering, and some people, in my readings, Yuri, they talk about that pain exists and suffering is a consequence. So I use the opposite from some of the things that I read. Can you maybe talk a little bit about more the definitions of pain and suffering so that we contextualize better here?
Yes. So in some of the views from a psychological standpoint, if we think about pain, that is, as it could be emotional pain, could be psychological pain, biological pain. If we put our hands in the oven, when the oven is on, we're going to get burns. That's going to generate pain. But the suffering is going to come, if we think, again, it's an analogy for the emotional and the psychological aspect as well, from these lines of therapy that I'm mentioning. So the pain is inevitable. We're here, we're humans. Life is going to give us a lot of lemons almost on a daily basis, sometimes on a daily basis. It's what we do with that, is exactly how do we create our own reality with the pain that we're suffering. And oftentimes we think about pain as well. You're mentioning pressure, Billie Jean King talking about pressure. If we're trying to work our bodies, let's say, to be healthier, we're gonna go, let's say, to the gym or do a sport that's gonna generate some muscle pain, but that's not suffering. That is pain, but that's not suffering. And then if we're trying to study something new, let's say a new language, we're going to study a new language, there's going to be a lot of frustration, a lot of mental pain of like, I don't understand what this word is. I thought I had it and you write it wrong. But that doesn't necessarily needs to be suffering attached with that pain, from small to large. And just to wrap up this part, even to when you talk about Viktor Frankl, there is a therapy that I appreciate a lot called acceptance and commitment therapy. In English is ACT. We say ACT, ACT. And they have been very helpful in creating manuals for people who, the Syrian refugees and everything, for a couple of years ago, and help them live a more meaningful life. And these are people, refugees, that have lost everything, that have endured so much pain in such a short amount of time, and even children and everything. So it goes to say, and it goes to show as well, that we can always try to manipulate and deal with the pain so it doesn't create further suffering.
Yeah, so this ACT is for refugees in the US or global?
This is global. It's called ACT, Acceptance and Commitment Therapy. We say ACT, and is a therapy that's been around for over 30 years now. It's become really popularized. It's one of the new cognitive behavior therapies. It's one that I utilize, and I really, really appreciate it, because you can use it for a number of different, many different conditions. But the one that I'm mentioning was from, I think, 2018 or something, when there was the big influx of Syrian refugees into Europe, and they were in these camps and all these subpar conditions. And the World Health Organization contacted one of the lead ACT psychologists, and he wrote a basically a manual and things to help these people. And they did a study 5 years after, and they saw that the intervention had a great impact. It was a very positive impact in the lives of those people.
Yeah, and I think it's important because you mentioned, as a clinical psychologist, you deal with a lot of people with, say, traumatic, right, post-traumatic disorder, and I would imagine refugees is a case in that you would see a large percentage of those individuals that are impacted having some PTSD, right? From that perspective, can we pivot maybe, Yuri, into a more spiritual view
Yeah.
of suffering, right? What can we say, perhaps? And you started with the the reference to twins, right? Identical twins, that they share the same genetic code. They are perhaps educated and brought up similarly, right? In the same family, they have been exposed to potentially the same friends, etc., etc., and yet they have a very different response to suffering.
Yes.
And maybe we can talk here in and we can talk about a spiritual but also spiritist view of how does understanding and belief in the immortality of the soul plays a part in how different we are in our response to pain and to suffering.
Absolutely. And this is something that through the lens of spiritism, for instance, we like if we learn about the immortal soul and we learn about all these things, it creates a whole different set of lens through which we can see pain and the consequence of the pain being like the suffering. And if we're using the same example of the twins, if we think about the immortality of the soul in the past lives, because the idea of multiple reincarnations, multiple passages in which we are always evolving, our own trajectory is very unique. We all have different trajectories. We all have things that we need to work on, things that we maybe said we are going to work on in previous reincarnation, we didn't. So we come to this one to endure some of those things too, you know. And Joanna in the book Plenitude, she talks about the two types, the trials and expiations. And she says it very well when she mentions that, you know, expiations are basically to restore balance, and they return the offender to the situation that they found themselves before the fall, before they made the mistake. So we think
So,
about
so let's
expiation.
yeah, let's go back here. Let me stop here because maybe uh you who are watching this may it's like, oh yeah, I got lost now. What is Joanna D'Angelo in her book? And I highly recommend. I think
Yes.
Yuri highly recommends as well. Plenitude, which is the third book of her psychology collection of 16 books, right? But she's referring to trials and expiation, or trials and atonement, as some people will see it, as where we are, right? As a reference to where we are in our spiritual journey today, right? I don't know if you want to explain further, Yuri, and sorry for interrupting you.
Yes, no, of course, of course. Yes, exactly where we are in our journey today, like from because we all have the spark from the love of God. We're all immortal beings and divine creatures, but we're still evolving spiritually to get to the point of a Christ or a spirit like that. So, in the idea that she's talking about trials and atonements or trials and expiations, is basically to talk about the origins of suffering. Why do we humans in this point in time we suffer? And she's saying the two origins of that is trials. We either suffer because of trials or expiations or atonements. And I already mentioned atonements as being to restore the balance. And the trials are things that these experiences that we undertake, and they could be proposed or helped by the mentors or the spiritual guides before we come to planet Earth to reincarnate, and they all help us grow. That's the bottom line. They all help us grow. Some through restoring the balance, others through undertaking new challenges, so we can grow as spiritual beings, as immortal spiritual beings.
That's awesome. That's awesome for us to understand, right? Number one, that there is a progression.
Mm-hmm.
Number two, well, number one is that with the concept of immortality of the soul, um, there's always a second, a third, a fourth chance, right? We don't
Yes.
disappear. The end which is usually seen as death, is really a physical end of this physical body, but our spirit continues to live on. And with that continuation, that means that until we get to that point of infinite wisdom and happiness and all that is good that comes into a long journey of many, many incarnations. We are here learning, and it's almost like a trial and error. In my mind's eye, Yuri, I see often more clearly than any other metaphor of that child, right? That the baby, and the minute the baby, right, does that to hold something, and as the first time that it can use the hand-eye coordination to hold that little whatever, a new synapse is made in the brain, right? This is very mental progression. And we can see us sometimes doing exactly that, like the baby that tries to and is unable until we can. And each attempt in this is an egoic response, right? The attempts that hurt us the most, that causes us the most suffering, are when under the microscope of a highly, highly connected society, more than ever, where everybody is observing you, looking at you, talking about you in social media, for example, we feel that we cannot fail, and it causes suffering. And to me, if I may judge that as an unnecessary cause of suffering, right? The fact that oh, I did this, and that will create a series of anxieties and worries that can, at some point, if unhinged, lead to a pathological, psychological problem, right?
Absolutely, and I love the fact that you brought the neuropsychological aspect to this as well. The
Mhm.
I think the analogy of the baby is a good one because yes, you're right. New synapse is formed the same way. So it's again, it's about learning from the experience, which we were talking about it
Yeah,
just minutes ago. And I'll use the same example. If you put your hands, if that same baby put their hands there, in a something that's burning hot, they're gonna burn themselves, and they're not gonna do it again because they learned from it. They learned from that pain that created that. Even we're talking about babies and like children, so underdeveloped brains can do that, and we sometimes as adults we insist on doing the same things
yeah,
and the same experiences that will lead us to
yeah,
experience pain, often unnecessary, and accompanying that unnecessary suffering as well.
yeah,
And it's amazing because the spiritual side of it, I think, brings this whole new set of lens, as I said, that is just amazing because it gives a lot of hope. If we think that that's the biggest thing to me, if we think that we are immortal beings and we know that we've had previous reincarnations, we're gonna have more ahead of us,
yeah,
that's great because every new one we're going to try to be a better version of ourselves. With every new day learning from the experiences, we try to be better versions of ourselves and to fulfill our goals that we set out before reincarnating, perhaps with our trials and restoring the balance through atonement and all those things. So I think the spiritual aspect of this is great, and then there's the other key player here that I think we can talk about, which is free will. And I think, what do you think of free
let's
will?
do it. Let's do it, right? So, because and this is very interesting. In I'm just thinking, right? We come from a very selfish, self-centered baby, if you will, immature being, psychologically speaking. That is, I am the center of the world. To become less and less
Hmm.
that in as an individual in our long journey toward individuation, we are also become aware of our part, our, let's say, how accountable, how responsible we are as a key player to the whole, right? So we impact, we impact the whole, and by whole I'm talking about the collective, and we are impacted by the collective. Joanna, in a different book, Yuri, she talks about if we can see ourselves as the wave in the ocean. I love it, right?
I like that. Yeah.
Right. So being the wave in the ocean, we are part of the ocean, but
Hmm.
the ocean is not the wave, right? the,
Excellent.
the whole is not me, but I am part of the whole, and I impact the whole. And she goes into this interesting discussion in a different book, The Integral Human Being, by the way.
Hmm.
She goes into that idea that we are now in a position, and I love to think that the 20 plus years of continued technological advances that comes from internet, and not just
Hmm.
internet is older than that, but the social media that has become a phenomenon so strong that actually is intrusive in everyday life, right?
Hmm.
We this little something here, this little tiny mobile device brings social media as a form to communicate and contact and connect us as ubiquitous as possible. So
Hmm.
I am connected to you, Yuri. You're
Hmm.
connected to me, and we may not ever have had the chance to meet face to face, right?
Hmm.
But they're touch points, they're this. And what is interesting, back to your free will question, so this is a little bit curvilinear instead of a straight line to answer that. But what she says is, in this hyper connected world, we are no longer able to distance ourselves from the suffering of the other, right? So she says this because it's really driving, and this is a very optimistic view of the worst of the worst in humankind, but it pushes us to a response that is not pity, or even, right, from pity goes to empathy, meaning I feel your pain, to actual compassion, which
Hmm.
is a very engaged, active participation in the pain of the collective.
Hmm.
And from that perspective, she says, yes, this is great, but like the wave in the ocean, you can say, I'm part of the ocean. I see this pain, but I still have free will. I still have the free will not to participate, and it's very interesting because that poses a whole different question. There's so many different areas of conflict today. If we just say go to right to United Nations and site and say how many areas of conflict, and boom, you have between wars and other civil unrests, etc. And this is public areas of conflict. We can talk about the conflicts that I have with my neighbor, the conflicts
Hmm.
that I have with my manager, with my
Yeah.
children, the conflicts that I have with myself, right?
Yeah.
And it's just very interesting. Despite all of those conflicts, now it is the time, and she speaks toward the psychological maturity, right? Now it is the time for us to say, I can no longer live indifferent to those conflicts. I have an active role in do something about it. And so it's very interesting. While we have free will, we are with our maturity, spiritual, psychological, etc., we're called upon now to have an active response to suffering.
Love that. I love the idea of being, having this active response. The analogy of the wave in the ocean is amazing. Another inspired analogy that she creates, because even if we think about it, she didn't say a wave in the beach. She used the ocean. And I love that, the vastness of the ocean, and thinking that we are waves that are part of this ocean that has a lot of other waves. So it brings, I think, a sense of belonging, a sense of interconnectivity with the other people, the other spirits be in the planet right now. And that creates, like you're saying, almost, again, we're talking about stages again, about the compassion being the last one, where we see so much suffering. The planet Earth as it is, as it's transitioning and everything, as we study and we learn about that, is rife with suffering. There's a lot of suffering, and it's part of the evolutionary purpose that it's achieving. And we have this suffering too, but we cannot just be passive observers nowadays, with the world being more connected than ever. And you're mentioning social media. If we think about the technological advancements of the last 50 years, it's more than the last 1500 years before, if we think about the impact and everything. So everything is growing and changing very, very, very quick. And then it creates this pressure. And in the end, it's about what we do with our time, the free will. Again, coming in here, what am I doing with my time? What am I doing with this precious time that I have on this planet, in this reincarnation, in this exact environment that I am supposed to be, that I chose to be in? So the idea of, Joanna says, we are the authors, of our own destiny, which is great. So if I'm the author, everything that I'm suffering up until now, and I acquired in my, let's say, karmic balance, I'm the author of that, but I'm also the author that can make the change. I'm also responsible for making the change in myself and in others. And I think this active participation is an amazing thing that she's talking about, because she says determinism, so the trials and atonements, and free will. So these two things together are what gonna help us, we can see that as tools, perhaps, and ways that we can see the world and our own role in it.
Yeah. I was there are two things that I'm thinking. So maybe let me break it into, because very separate, right? The number one, it's again a figure that most of us may be familiar with, the swimmer, the Olympian, Michael Phelps.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I don't know if
Yeah.
you know, but his whole life he dealt with ADHD, and swimming was the tool for him to manage that from his mother and his coach. So as he swims, and has that disciplined approach to swim and swim more, swim faster, his body that was so adapted to that sport became like, oh, the opportunity that Billie Jean King talks about, right? That perfect body for amazing feats.
Yeah.
And there he goes. But what he finds from a mental well-being, and he actually produced a documentary not so long ago about mental health and athletes, Olympians specifically, right? Because you spend your whole life prepared for maybe 10 seconds,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
right? And how are you unable to deal with that, plus potential injuries, plus many other things? But as he goes and he's very successful in the Olympics, and everybody now starts to know Michael Phelps, he goes in full-blown depression and took a year of absolutely not doing what he was supposed to do. And then he and his coach comes up with this new idea of, I'm going to do something that was never done before. So he goes from the depth of despair and
Mm-hmm.
depression into, I'm going to do eight, I don't know if you remember, eight gold medals in all those different areas of swimming.
Categories. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, which means that he now had to transform himself, his body, his technique, to be able to be adaptive to all those eight categories. And so he goes into full bloom, just as an athlete, working out and doing things he's never done before, including going to the gym and working different types of muscles, etc. And he does. he accomplishes that despite, I don't know if you know this, I read his biography not so long ago, but in one of the very key competitions, he actually gets blinded by the water that gets through his goggle,
Oh.
and he had a choice, right? Do I go and just focus on the goal, or do I stop to take off the water to see, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which is goal versus process.
Mm.
And he chooses to go without stopping, trusting that all those times that he practiced, and his brain required him to practice by counting. I'm not one of those people, but there are some people out there that they just count everything. So he would go into one stroke,
Mm-hmm.
butterfly, right? One stroke, one, two, three. So he knew exactly how
Mm-hmm.
many more strokes he needed before he could put your hands, and he won. But I think it's genius to think about it. And why am I bringing that up? Which is the idea that he was suffering, and he
Yes.
imposed a different type of suffering in
Mm-hmm.
himself and pain, right? A
Mm-hmm.
lot of new muscles,
Mm-hmm.
etc. And the potential failure, because he made it extremely public. And what brings to my mind when I was reading his book is that he didn't do this because he wanted to overemphasize in a narcissistic view of I am Michael Phelps, I am invincible. He did that because he wanted to bring swimming back, right, to the forefront
Interesting.
of sports. And so with that driver, he kept doing, and he was very successful. I have to say, it is no longer so. I'm afraid he's no longer playing that role. But what an amazing feat that he did that. And from that perspective that you start to talk about, Yuri, on that uh, uh, what we're here, what is our mission in life, right?
Mm-hmm.
We really need to perhaps take the time to look, including in our the darkness that inhabits may inhabit in all of us.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe pathological depression, maybe pathological anxieties. And I don't know if it's fair, please correct me if I'm wrong, but embrace it, because underneath, at the very bottom of it all, may be the answer to all the extreme opportunities, the legacy that we can bring to our, the ocean that we inserted on, or to ourselves. Those are just thoughts that came to my mind randomly. What do you think?
I agree. I think that the example of Michael Phelps, and like you said, the depression, all his mental health issues, he is a big advocate.
Hmm.
And yes, the fact is, and you said we gotta choose. He chose a different type of pain, and yes,
Yeah.
because at the stage that we're in our spiritual evolution, and the planet that we're in, we're gonna have pain. We're gonna have pain. Suffering will come, but it's a matter of what pain are we choosing, and what we're doing with that pain. What type of then suffering are we dealing with? And this last piece that you mentioned, I think it's important as well for us to realize, because if we look around and if we look inward as well, we're gonna start to have an idea of what are some of our darknesses, of what are some of the things that we perhaps they come as expiations, perhaps they come as trials, perhaps we need to go through some of these things that we sometimes don't understand. And I would say more often than not, we don't understand. We're talking maybe suffering and pain from like a severe health matter and something like that. Oftentimes those things are what pushes us, what drives us in the right path, as if we're like, imagine we're deviating from our path, and like somebody or something like nudges us and we stumble a little bit, but we go back to the right path. I think a lot of the times this redirection is very important, because we don't have a full recollection of all the things that we set out to do, or all of our objectives and our mission. But we can have a very, very good idea, I think, if we look around where we are and what we are. What are some of my flaws still? What are some of the things that, I need to work on? And what are some of the things that I bring to the table? By table, let's call it the ocean of humanity. There are some qualities and some things that I will help, that will help people grow, in myself as a spiritual being grow as well.
Awesome. Well, we are at time,
Hmm.
Yuri, and I just want to say to all of us, let us embrace, right, the pressures of society, whatever they may be. I know we share different, but we share the element of pain. Um, I would be surprised if I go to the entire world and I find a single being that is painless, pain free, right? We all going through different nuanced types of pain. Let us be kind to ourselves. Let us be
Hmm.
kind to each other, and understand that maybe something that is very painful to the other, I have already overcome. Therefore, it's
Yeah.
not something that I have to deal with, but I have to respect that that person, the other that we're seeing, may not have overcome that as of yet. Any final words, Yuri, to us here?
It was a pleasure doing this today, this talk. And I want to, for people who are watching or people who are listening to us, I just want to say that we we have gone a long way already, and we still have a long way to go. But the thing is, we're marching forward and understanding these things, and having, especially like I said, the lens of spiritism can help us make make the difference within ourselves and to the society as well. So we can always grow, we can always learn from pain, like you said, embracing the darkness and growing from that.
Absolutely. With that, I want to say thank you, everybody. I appreciate you being here with us. As I mentioned in the beginning, put your feedback, your questions, your thoughts about the subject, and I'll see you next week. Bye, everyone.
Right.